Hello. Before we get started, I wanted to say hi. This is my first video. I normally make Let's Plays on my other channel, but I wanted to try something new and made this secret channel. Super secret. Ooh, spooky secret. This first subject I chose is a dark subject, and it's a serious one. But all the videos I saw on the subject were either clinical or filled with jokes to lighten the mood. But in this delivery, I wanted to treat it with a serious tone, which is why I won't be in the rest of the video. You will only hear my disembodied voice. It'd be kind of silly to see a purple dog talking about this subject. You'll find out what it is. I don't want to spoil it. Well, actually, it might be in the title. Anyway, I'm just gonna wow out. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you do, make sure you do that YouTube thing, like, subscribe, and I'll see you all later. You'll see me again at the end of the video. But for now, the deep, sultry tones of my disembodied voice. Warning, the video you're about to watch talks about some serious subjects. If you're uncomfortable with themes typically found in horror, you may want to skip this video. A name so long that you stop and sigh, exhausted at just looking at the word before you had to pause and concentrate your entire focus in an attempt to pronounce it. Maybe you had to stop and Google it, and see how it was pronounced first. Or maybe you never heard the word until now. Anthropodermic bibliophagy. Books made of human flesh. Science has a wonderful way of almost completely taking the bite out of a word or term. Once you know what it means, it makes the word that much more intimidating. Now because of the horrors of the word itself, and less because of the horror of pronouncing it. Books made of human flesh. It sounds almost dumbed down and plain by comparison, but it harkens to necromancy, pain, suffering, a horror that only man could create, or only man would understand. Books represent knowledge and learning, writing of a person's life, history, fiction, and more. But a book bound in flesh is a tome of knowledge bound in the experiences of a human life. Everything that person was, or will be, is in that book, in its most literal sense. You touch this book, and you're touching a human life. Everything they have eaten, every lover who has touched them, every breath they took. It's in your hands, and you gaze upon it. It's an almost morbid beauty. Was this what the person who made this book thought as he was tearing the flesh from his victim? Thoughts of beauty? Is person too generous a term for the kind of beast that would do something like this? Anthropodermic bibliophagy has been present in media longer than anyone watching this could be. The first I remember hearing of it was the same way I'm sure many of you did. The Evil Dead. A movie about a young man going to the cabin for a romantic weekend with his main squeeze and his friends. It was supposed to be a nice vacation where lovers go and be lovers. The cabin, however, was previously owned by a scientist who had discovered the Necronomicon Ex Mortis.
Necronomicon Ex Mortis. Roughly translated, Book of the Dead.
Ash and the others find the book and tapes about it. They read it aloud, and the gates to hell have opened in their private, secluded paradise. The dead rise, trees animate, and every horrible thing that could happen does. In the end, Ash's girlfriend becomes infected, and Ash's arm does too. He's seen it happen a couple times by now. He knows what he has to do. Taking a battered old chainsaw from off the shelf, revs it, and bears the loud, angry machine down onto his infected arm. He screams in pain and then laughs as he feels like he finally has control again. His own infected blood splattering against his face, but his job isn't done. His friends, or what's left of his friends, are still in there, and he needs to end this. The Necronomicon itself is a character. It's been here longer than me or Ash have been, and it will likely outlast us too. That's the thing about evil. It doesn't die. It changes and adapts the same way that man does, fitting, as evil is a monster of our own making. But what is the actual history of books made of flesh? We just talked about the Necronomicon, so let's stay on that train of thought. If you love cosmic horror, then you probably know where I'm going next. In H.P. Lovecraft's universe, the Necronomicon was created by Abdul al-Hazred, an Arabic poet driven mad in his worship of the god Cthulhu. It was a book so powerful and horrible that it was banned world round, but many copied, translated, and made their own versions of his work, and these books are held in museums under lock and key, where they remain, best forgotten. Probably for good reason. The book holds knowledge not meant for man. Weirdly though, it was never mentioned in this source material that the book was bound in flesh. It was actually additions by Stephen King and the director of The Evil Dead, Sam Raimi, who first mentioned this grimoire being made of skin. Outside of fans of Lovecraft's work, it wouldn't be an absurd leap, as books being made of skin have existed in the real world as far back as the 1800s, and books were often bound in leather, animal flesh. What is a man?
A miserable little pile of secrets!
Other than a miserable pile of secrets, just another animal. The Necronomicon in Raimi's work didn't just raise the dead, it was surprisingly very representative of the original Necronomicon. This book was written by a man who worshipped the god of madness. Madness, in Lovecraft's lore, is caused by knowing too much, knowing the workings of the cosmos. A side effect of trying to understand that the rules on our planet matter only to us, that the entire universe outside is inconceivable to man. So the idea that it rose the dead isn't a leap. In Call of Cthulhu, Lovecraft wrote, "That is not dead, which can eternal lie, and after strange aeons, even death may die." Death isn't death, it's a state of matter. Cthulhu embodies this. Time, death, life, space, laws, physics. We don't understand the truth to any of it because we aren't equipped to handle that kind of knowledge. But old ones and elder gods are. Time travel in Evil Dead seems silly, but considering the book is written with the knowledge from a god who doesn't respect time or death, is it really silly? Besides, the book is magical, don't question it. As you've seen and guessed, these things are hideous. But in actuality, they look no different than an animal-bound book. Turns out this is a huge problem for museums and collectors. A lot of the books that are anthropodermic say in the first page that they're made of skin and even name the person. But most of the time, it's not true. So if they look the same, how do you know it's human? Your first guess is probably DNA, but the tanning process makes this very difficult. Tanning can remove all of the DNA, and anything that gets missed degrades quickly after death. These books are typically hundreds of years old. What they actually use is called peptide mass fingerprinting. Don't worry, it's my first time hearing about it too. They take a small piece and run it through a mass spectrometer. This then makes a graph, and every animal has a unique graph. When they find one that has a chart similar to great apes, they know it's a human. A weird misconception with these books, aside from being associated with evil or Satan worship, is that these books were mostly medical and often are fully bound, made by doctors who have seen so much death that they've become numb to the idea that the corpse on their table is a person. This part is true, and makes me think twice about using that back alley doctor again. As for the partial binding, it's usually just the spine. Many also believe that they were made from living victims or after their death as a sick prize. While many were unwillingly made into books, or it wasn't mentioned until post-mortem, just as many asked for it to be done. One man who asked to be made into a book wanted to be given to a man he once robbed as a reward for his bravery. Imagine getting robbed, and you live the rest of your life in fear that you'll be made a victim again. Then, this gets brought to your doorstep. Is it supposed to be like a trophy, or an opportunity for the victim to exact revenge by turning his attacker into a joke? I couldn't think of a crueler thing to do to the victim other than to drop the body on his doorstep and say, "He's your problem now." There are a surprising amount of detailed accounts of skin books. One popular book was made by Mary Lynch. Mary went to a massive hospital, the kind that was like a mini mall of medicine. It was a traditional hospital, it was an insane asylum, and people could pay to visit the people inside or watch medicine being performed on them. It was one of the first instances of medical knowledge being available to common folk. But it was more often treated as a sideshow at a carnival. Mary was sent in for tuberculosis and died 6 months after arriving, and was set to be buried in a mass grave on the hospital grounds. A doctor was interested in her though. He was a specialist in foodborne illnesses called trichinosis. It was caused by eating partially cooked wild animals, and the biggest indicator of this was cysts. The doctor performed an autopsy on Mary and found an uncountable amount of cysts. This was a huge leap for science, as this was the first time that someone was confirmed to have trichinosis. It wouldn't be a very good or relevant story if I just left the story here. Of course, the good doctor didn't just harvest this information from her corpse. He took strips of her flesh and preserved them in a chamber pot. If you didn't know, a chamber pot is a Dutch oven-shaped pot of this time that was stowed under the bed and used for late-night evacuations. Her flesh was being preserved in urine. Gross, disgusting, and the ultimate disgrace, but he may have saved this flesh from worse. If he didn't steep it in urine, then it likely would have been put in any number of other excrement. Unfortunately, it was a necessary step in leather production, as this raises the pH to a toxic level and softens the flesh and makes it more pliable, preparing it as a quality hide and a needed step if you were to bind a book by stretching the hide over it. Back to the doctor. He did this because he wanted to bind his favorite medical books in skin. His favorite books were about women's health and reproduction, and 6 years after Mary's death, his wife died of childbirth, making this a more fitting reminder. Speculations on the mode and appearances of impregnation in the human female really rolls off the tongue, but they only get harder to pronounce. The first page of the book reads, "The leather with which this book is bound was tanned from the skin of the thigh of Mary L., affected with encysted trichinosis, who died of consumption, tanned in a pot de chambre by myself at the Philadelphia Hospital. Book bound in March 1884. Mary L. was an Irish widow, aged 28 years, died 1869. John Stockton Hill, April 2nd, 1884. He hadn't used her flesh in these books until 20 years later. The other books were much harder to say, as they're in French, so I'm just going to put the names on the screen, because French people definitely don't want to hear me mess it up.
Le nouvelle découverte sur toutes les parties principales de l'homme et de la femme. Recueil des secrets de Louis Bourgeois.
By the time the books were bound and reached the library, he had moved to New Jersey and remarried and had 5 children. It seemed like reading all these women's reproduction books really came in handy. These books are now in the Historical Medical Library in Philadelphia. That note might have seemed cold, but it was the most detailed and direct account of Anthropodermic Book's origin so far. Her book was found in the library under her name and death date, despite being done without Mary's permission. This wasn't a madman or a doctor who was cold and robotic. He was a man who respected and valued her. He valued women in general, and he took her and her condition seriously. She did a lot for medicine, and the doctor found a weird but genuine way of thanking her. She wasn't just a body on his table. She was Mary Lynch, and now her work will outlast her. Where popular culture views these books as horrible, monstrous tomes of forbidden knowledge, in actuality they were, and still are, people. I view them that way myself now, too. This isn't a morbid artifact. This is Mary. Not all these books were made in a noble fashion, nor were the people they came from noble themselves. Some were criminals, like in the case of William Burke. In 1829, a doctor performed a live dissection on the cadaver of the late William Burke. Burke was a criminal wanted for killing 16 people and selling their bodies to Robert Knox for use in his anatomy lectures. Remember how I portrayed flesh tomes as beautiful? Burke's would be better portrayed as humorous. How fitting for a murderer who sold his victims to a doctor to be put on display for a class, to be executed and carved up for an audience himself. Couldn't happen to a nicer person. One such horrible tome is in possession at Harvard. Destinies de l'Âme. I hope I pronounced that right. It's shorter. I thought I would take a crack at it. It's always the French books though, isn't it? It was recently discovered to be bound in human skin, and unlike the previously mentioned, the entire book was covered in skin, not just the spine. Harvard announced these findings in a tone-deaf manner with a tasteless joke about cannibalism. Good news for fans of anthropodermic bibliophagy, bibliomaniacs, and cannibals. I don't consider it that bad of a joke. I just wanted to say tasteless and cannibal in the same sentence. But there was someone genuinely upset. Paul Needham, from Princeton University. He found the joke to be in bad taste too, and believed that the book was crafted by perversion, not through respect. He believes that the book should be buried as the skin was taken without respect, care, and without consent, and that the book had to be made of a woman's skin, or else it wouldn't fulfill the doctor's evil sexual desires. Which might not have been far off, as the doctor who did it used flesh from a nameless woman, flesh that he just so happened to have lying around. To him, a book that was very human had to have a bit of human in it, so he covered the whole thing in skin. Needham says that this doctor took it from a mental patient who couldn't consent, and if that's the case, I agree that this book is better off resting with who it came from. It's really no different than displaying artifacts stolen from people we've conquered. It's a disturbing monument to a man's fetish. If you consider these books to be people, then you have to respect their wishes, and if the person who was used was mentally ill and couldn't sign their body off to him, then it was a crime to take her flesh and a crime to turn her into a book. It would be best if the skin was never taken, but they need to be respected, and the book should be buried, or maybe put in a mausoleum. Unfortunately, most of these books were made by non-consenting individuals. It's a tough question with tough answers, and it really is a case-by-case basis. These are beautiful things when done in a respectful way, and these books will last much longer than us who are reading them, assuming proper care. It's a perfect monument in a sense, but when taken from an unwilling victim, is it no different than the horrid twisted flesh wrapping the Necronomicon? Hey, it's me again, Amari. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you liked the video. It's a weird first subject to cover, especially when I wanted to do gaming stuff, but what are books but visual novels without graphics? Anyway, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. I have a lot of videos planned already, and I'd like to post a new one between once a week and 2 weeks. They won't all be video essays, and I want to do subjects that randomly get my attention so they feel a little bit more natural. Thank you all for watching, and if you want to remember me after I'm dead, feel free to put all my videos on Blu-ray and bind the case in my flesh.